My name is Charles Omole. I'm the Director General of Institute for Police and Security Policy Research. Over the last many years, I've been involved in security sector reform in over 40 African countries. So the question I want to ask today is, why is Africa's security still fragmented? Why are security sectors in Africa fragmented and siloed in national buckets in a continent crying for unity and convergence of security operations in order to promote peace and unity? Africa has become the scavenging ground for different world powers who have carved the continent through divide and rule and has made cohesive security cooperation impossible for over 100 years. Although many security cooperation institutions exist on paper, in reality, security convergence has eluded Africa due to many factors I want us to look at today. With mutual distrust among many countries, dozens of wars, civil conflicts, massive corruption, and a penchant for sit-tight leadership, a perfect storm has been created which makes a Pan-African security convergence almost impossible to create in reality. A divided Africa will always remain underdeveloped and remain a playing ground for powers who play us against one another and keep us individually small and collectively weakened. Such an Africa will remain dependent on aids and handouts, while its resources and people are plundered and exploited for the development of global powers. This reality must come to an end. Africa needs a new reality that will promote security convergence and Pan-African responses to global challenges. So, what are, in my view, the top 10 steps needed to promote a Pan-African security sector convergence and cooperation? Number one, change of emphasis from just force alone to service. You see, the emphasis of security in Africa is always about the force element of their service rather than the service element of the use of force. So we need to reorientate Africa. That's why you've seen that security sector and security apparatus in Africa has been used more against Africans by African leaders than against external aggressors. Even if you look at it from national perspective, many security operations or operatives in many countries in Africa, engage more in battles with their own compatriots than with foreign powers. That's because of the force mentality as opposed to the service mentality. So the paradigm has to change. That's the number one. Number two, greater political convergence among African political leaders on what the future of Africa should be. We can copy a lot of what happens in the EU, in the European Union, where every time there's a major decision that needs to be made, it has to be ratified by every member country. That is why certain decisions, even within the European Union, are made based on consensus, in which case one country has a veto. That's because they understand that there cannot be security convergence without political equilibrium and political vision sharing. That doesn't exist in Africa at the moment. So there's a need for greater political convergence among African leaders politically about the future of the continent. Number three, reorientation from regime preservation to citizens' protection. Given the colonial source and origin of most security forces in Africa, the original paradigm for setting up many of these security outfits actually has been the preservation of governments and regimes rather than actually preserving and looking after the people. That is sadly still the case today in many African countries. So we need an Africa where the paradigm changes of the security sector from preservation of government to actually preservation of the people. The loyalty will now be to the constitution of the individual countries rather than to the current political leaders that are in power. Number four, the fourth point, less opacity in security matters. less opacity in security matters. You know, security is become the easy bogeyman in Africa where everything is Eden. If I go on the internet right now, I can find out a lot more about American security system, their budgets, their expenditure, how they spend it. I can find out all that freely online. Try to do that by any African country, you will find nothing. Because the lack of transparency within security sector in Africa has been used to fund and to perpetuate corruption. So everything is Eden. Why? Because of security. In a country like Nigeria, for example, the budget of the State Security Service is unknown. Whether it's $1, $1 billion, nobody knows except the president. You know, so that's an example of typical African security sector management, where a lot of things are shrouded in secrecy and they hide under security matters. But if I can know a lot about what America spends on security, what is so special about Africa that suddenly we need better security than America? So it just shows you that we need more transparency in procurement and activities that surround security sector. That is needed to build confidence in our security apparatus. Number 5, more intra-African exchange of personnel, methods, ideas, and best practice. Africa needs to set up a more robust system than currently exists, where there's a better exchange of personnel, you know, a better exchange of methods and ideas, so that there's gradual similarities in the way we do things. That similarity gradually, though, will help to create a convergence as we go forward. Number 6, a Pan-African security agency to interface with Interpol and global agencies on behalf of Africa. Currently, Africa deals with Interpol on a nation-by-nation basis. But we need to actively promote the equivalent of what we call Europol in the European Union, whereby rather than dealing with each of the 28 member countries one by one, you know, Interpol simply liaises with Europol, and Europol provides the information on behalf of the EU. We need something similar effectively for Africa. That will begin to force cooperation, interchange of ideas, and confidence building measure will begin to take place. So we need that very urgently. Number 7, promotion of principles of interoperability of systems and harmonization of standards operating procedure. I will say that again. Promotion of principles of interoperability of systems and harmonization of standard operating procedure across the continent. Currently, across the continent, as somebody who have visited over 40 of African countries and worked in those places, it surprises me how different many of the standard operating procedures are in each of these countries. The variance of those standard operating procedures makes interoperability difficult, because it means personnel from one country cannot easily, fit into that of another country. There's a need for a better understanding of one another and more standardization, as it were, of standard operating procedure. That way, when it comes to harmonization, it's a bit easier to do than if we don't have those standardization. Number 8, political will that emphasizes the need for less colonial mentality that prefers non-African solution, equipment, tools, and methods. By that, I mean that there is this colonial mentality across Africa, which means we prefer stuff from our colonial masters and from the West than from Africa. A typical example of this is in South Africa. In the 80s, there's a company that started producing a fighter jet called Cheetah. Cheetah was a robust fighter jet. But guess what? Not one single African country bought it. Other than Ecuador and Chile that were noted to have bought it, no African country bought it. No wonder by the time it was 2008, Cheetah went out of business. And guess what they replaced it with? Fighter jets from Sweden. So that tells you that even the Africa industry that we are supposed to patronize among ourselves to grow Africa, we don't do so. Currently, Africa has kits from more than 10 different world powers, from China to Russia to Europe to America, to India, from, we have kits, military kits and, security, equipment from all these countries. That alone makes convergence difficult. And that divide and rule is what must stop. Africa needs to agree standardization to say this is what we're going to buy and this is what it must have. That way, the uniformity that we begin to get across the board will make a future convergence vision possible. Number 9, standardization of kits and equipment. Standardization of kits and equipment. What that means, I've said a little bit of it earlier on number 8, but what this particularly means is African countries need to have a specification of what kit every country should have. That way, interoperability becomes easier. Linking systems becomes easier because the original design factored in the fact that it will interface with other brotherly systems. So we need standardization of kits across Africa so that the military equipment, the security equipment we get are similar in nature. Even if they are manufactured differently by different people to start with, but the standard kit, in terms of the technical specification, the software specification will be similar. And we have built-in features to allow interoperability to take place. And lastly, number 10. This is very important. Priority for creating an African security industry that will focus on manufacturing tools that Africa needs. Africa, in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, needs to create an African military industrial complex whereby we begin to manufacture our own kit. A lot of the kits we need and use in Africa can be manufactured in Africa. And I feel such an endeavor will make military and security convergence a lot easier because we are buying Africa. Therefore, uniformity is easier. If these 10 steps I've enumerated can be taken seriously by African leaders, we will consequently be able to witness a stronger, more agile and peaceful Africa. That is our dream. Insecurity is a hindrance to development. Only a peaceful Africa can develop economically. Security, convergence, and cooperation will definitely promote peace on this continent. That peace will enable Africa to take its place on the global stage as a force for good in the world. Thank you.